Karlin Borisenko is known for going undercover and infiltrating radical woke left events to find out just what the heck they're talking about and promoting. Well, recently, Karlin spent 4 days undercover at the Institute for Research into Male Supremacism, quite the title, which was an event funded by the University of California, Berkeley. So you could just imagine. Well, Karlin says what she saw isn't the left coming to their senses after a major loss to Donald Trump and the pushback against their woke ideologies. Instead, they're ramping up and getting even crazier. Independent journalist Karlin Borisenko, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me and for sharing this crazy experience with your audience. You guys are going to be blown away at what you see.
Okay, so explain, how did you first find out about this event?
Yeah, so I've been tracking the Institute for Research on Male Supremacism for about 2.5 years now. I actually encountered them at my first ever undercover conference where they were presenting at this Collective Power Conference, which is a reproductive justice conference at Hampshire College. And I sat in on one of their sessions and I was just hooked from there. I was like, this is one of the craziest organizations I've ever seen. And they held their big conference this past week and I knew I had to go because, and luckily for me, it was a virtual event. So it was actually relatively easy to get into. But I did have to sit through 4 days worth of their presentations, and it was so much more shocking than I ever thought it was going to be.
Normally you go undercover, you actually show up to the events, but this time it was virtual.
Yes, it was much easier to do it, but virtual is still difficult because it's actually much easier for them to track who you are if you sign up virtually and to potentially kick you out. But they didn't, and I was able to get the entire conference on video.
Do you know how many people showed up to this?
I'm honestly not really sure. There seemed to be a rotating band of people that were coming in and out the entire time. So I would say probably at least a couple hundred. So we're not talking about a massive conference, but what we are talking about is these are graduate students, PhDs, and professors at universities, not only all over the United States, but all over the world. There were a bunch of people from Australia. There were a bunch of people from the UK and Europe in general. And so this is really something where they are coordinating with people all over the world to share these crazy ideas. And a lot of the papers that I saw presented at this conference, they were completed for degree requirements. So like master's theses in the United States, PhD, doctoral theses in the United States. So this is stuff that's happening at major American universities.
Okay, so you provided us with a few clips. You have a lot more, and you are posting the clips on your Substack. Is that where you're placing them?
Yeah, you can find them on my Substack, Karlin, KARLYN.substack.com, and also on my Twitter. I'll be posting them there as well.
Okay, so we do have the links down below for both of those to follow you. But let's play. We do have 4 clips that show some of a sampling of the craziness. Let's go ahead and play this first one. This one is deep platforming. What is this one about? This is deep platforming as a strategy. So they're saying they want to deplatform people. They're pushing for censorship.
Oh, exactly. And you're going to see this. This was actually a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, and you're going to see how committed they are to deplatforming their political opponents.
You would think that they would have learned by now that this is not a good strategy, but here it is.
I think a solution that will really disrupt capitalism, honestly, is deplatforming people and making specific websites, forums, whatever, illegal, and actually having like consequences, material consequences. Although I'm an abolitionist, I know that we have to kind of exist in our world with the things that we have currently. Because in reality, I would just want to burn everything the fuck down and rebuild something new, but that can't be done. So I think that deplatforming is probably the swiftest way for us to do that, and making sure people stay deplatformed. So not being like Elon Musk and letting Trump and Milo Yiannopoulos get back on Twitter now that he owns it, right? When he was deplatformed when Jack Dorsey was there, right? So really like standing on business and making sure people do not have access to these social media websites and forums that allow them to perpetuate and push this information in digital spaces, because that's where the youth is getting this information from. It's not coming from the man on the corner talking about it. It's coming from TikTok. It's coming from Reddit. It's coming from these different websites that are talking about it. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of nuance around the language that's being used that some of us who are of a particular age, we may not even know that's the language that they're using to talk about these things, right? So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
And I think that ties a little bit into the platforming issue that Dr. Coghill just mentioned as well. Like, I spent my whole career doing the platforming. Really, it's like the core strategy we do. But even I'm getting more and more skeptical of it, because they have their own platforms, and it's very hard to control them, and they're getting more and more financing. So they can, if they get kicked off somewhere, get an alternative. There's so many alternative platforms with huge reach now. It still something. It still does something, but it's becoming less and less of a useful tactic over time, because we don't have this sort of pressure to get people off these platforms anymore. X is one of those cases, but it's true for TikTok, and it's true for all of them now, really.
Okay. So they're still pushing this. This is insane. Don't they realize that this is one of the reasons why people no longer trust them and support them, is that they have these fascist ideas of censoring opponents rather than actually combating with good ideas and debating?
No, they really do have no idea. This was one of the most bizarre experiences of my life, because it was like being in an echo chamber where they only listen to each other. This is part of why I can go into these events. They don't pay attention to people like you and I, Kim. They only talk to each other. They only listen to each other. They spin each other up around all these ideas. And so they really do think that this is still a good idea, and that the majority of the world is on their side.
Oh, gosh. Okay. This next clip is indoctrinating youth. What is this about?
So this is a very short clip, but you're going to hear this is actually a PhD graduate from the education program at the University of Massachusetts. They're now teaching abroad in Europe, but media literacy was a constant theme at this conference, where they were kept bringing up, we need to teach kids media literacy. We need to teach kids media literacy. We need to go to the school and teach media literacy. What does media literacy mean? It means teaching kids to think like them. And so you're going to hear this person is going to overtly say, I've been indoctrinating kids for 10 years in these media literacy courses that I've been teaching.
All right, let's watch this.
I teach media literacy every year. I think indoctrinating the youth is a wonderful way to spend your time. I think this is what I've been doing for maybe 10 years.
Oh my gosh. That's insane. That is I've been indoctrinating the youth. This is like rewarding. So great to indoctrinate. How they're literally using these words, indoctrinating the youth.
Yes, they literally use those words when they're talking to each other. They know exactly and precisely what they're doing. And again, like, and that person's also funny, because also in that same clip, they did a whole diatribe about how romance movies on like the Hallmark Channel and Lifetime are aspects of white supremacy in order to teach people how to be in like nuclear families and romantic relationships. So it was like a really weird thing, but that person's crazy.
Yeah. So going back to the topic of we do have a couple more clips. But going back to the topic of what this whole convention was about, this research into male supremacism. So what was their goal? And why would they talk about deplatforming and indoctrinating youth? Like, in how are they wanting to censor, and what are they wanting to indoctrinate the youth with that has to do with male supremacism?
So it's kind of the same old thing that we've been hearing from the left for years, is that they believe that Donald Trump's election in the United States is an indication that fascism has taken over and is rampant, and it is their job as the educated PhDs of the world, in order to go into the schools to teach the next generation to give up their male supremacism. Also, male supremacy is intimately linked to white supremacy for them, and so they don't believe you can solve one without solving the other. And so this was basically their event, where they were all coming together to strategize and to share ideas. They talked a lot about Andrew Tate at this event. They talked about J.K. Rowling. They talked about Elon Musk. They talked about Joe Rogan, even, they said, was almost as bad as Andrew Tate. I'm like, I'm not quite sure that that's true, but okay.
Right.
But it really was just like a strategy organizing event, where they're sharing information and ideas with each other about how to advance their political agenda.
Oh, it's so bizarre. You know, one of the issues with the feminist movement, and I'm not against feminism or the feminist movement. You know, there's always radical, right? Things get way too radical, and one of the consequences of it has been men not really knowing what their role is now that women are like, we could do everything. And so then men have been kind of left in this sort of like, okay, well, what's our job? What's our role? And guys like Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and I guess the Tates, kind of have filled that void and answered the question of what is being a man. And rather than, it's interesting that their idea, this conference, that their idea is, no, these are toxic, this is terrible. But do they offer a solution as to what the role is for men now that women are thinking, well, we could just do it all? Or are they just like, no, we just have to break down men even more?
Yeah, they believe that the role for men is to give up their inner patriarchy and to basically, give up their toxic masculinity. There was actually a whole presentation at the conference about how Andrew Tate has impacted teachers, because they talked about this over and over again, where they're saying young boys are not buying into these ideas anymore, and they're going into school and they're talking about Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson and all these people, and this is having a severe impact apparently on the mental health of teachers that are teaching these young boys. And so they're hyper aware that men are kind of backlashing to this idea of, feminism. Also, a theme that I'm seeing come up on the left quite a bit now is they're pushing different types of feminism, where some types of feminism are good and some types of feminism are considered to be enemy feminisms, where they're basically not real feminism. And actually, the next clip we're going to play is a perfect example of this, because there was kind of like a non-binary person that obviously was born a man but presents a little bit more feminine, presenting at the conference. And in the presentation that this person gave, someone asked a question in the chat about, is it male supremacy for trans women to be in women's sports? And that did not go over well at all, because in their world, in order to be a feminist, you have to accept men being women as feminists too. So it's like they're the ones that believe that trans women are women, and if you don't accept them as women, then you're not a real feminist. And so the struggle session at the conference was about that.
Okay, tell us what a struggle session is before we play this clip.
Struggle session is basically where if you're around a group of leftists and you say something that is not in line with their ideology, you're going to get a little bit of punishment, or you're even, in this case, going to actually get kicked out of their event. And so the crime that was committed in this case was that an attendee at a male supremacism conference asked, is it male supremacy for trans women to be in women's sports? And that is not allowed. And you're going to see exactly how that was handled at this event.
Okay, here it is.
Thank you so much, Kat. I did just want to make a quick comment at present, because we've had some, I would say, an inflammatory comment in the chat. We have removed that user just because it's not how shit works here. Apologies for me swearing. But for those who are unfamiliar with how the IRMS defines male supremacism, I want to be very clear when I state this, that our organizational definition is specifically focused on the power that cisgender heterosexual men have in society. And this is something that negatively impacts both cis and trans women, trans men, and gender non-conforming folks across the globe. If you are not open to that, please do not stick around. I'm not mincing words here. It's not the space. Apologies for coming off slightly aggressive, but there has been some discussion in the chat. And I want to make that clear that this is an inclusive and safe space for our panelists, for our attendees, and for the people who are part of the IRMS today. Apologies, Kat, that happened during your presentation, but if it was going to happen at any point, it was probably that one.
Oh, wow. Okay. Don't they realize that it is absolutely male supremacism that a man can wake up one day and say, I'm now a woman, and then go and be accepted in all these women's spaces? Like, that's a privilege that somebody like Rachel Dolezal didn't get when she woke up one day and said, I'm black, right? Like, she wasn't allowed to do that, but men are allowed to do this.
Well, actually, one of the big themes at the conference was biological essentialism, which and they are completely against biological essentialism, which means that you acknowledge that there are two genders, there are men and women, and there are no infinite number of they them genders, and you make people adhere to the gender binary, which is again being men and women, and they are vehemently against that. They say that biological essentialism is not real, gender is not about your biology, and so for them, and there'll be plenty of clips coming out saying this, for them, like the idea that men can't be women is actually goes against their entire ideology.
Okay, I'm so confused by these by this, like the logical leaps that you have to make in order to make this try to make sense is like the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. So this is why they're against J.K. Rowling, right? Is because she is a woman that says women are women. And I don't accept men as women just because they claim that they're women suddenly. I'm not accepting that. And that's why they're against J.K. Rowling.
That's exactly right. They are against anyone who says there's two genders, men and women, and that you cannot be anything other than those two genders. So J.K. Rowling was one of their favorites to beat up on at the conference. I have many clips of them talking about her. But also, I mean, listen, Donald Trump's executive order saying clearly that we're not going to teach anything other than men and women in schools is one of the things that's really pissing these people off. And I know that this seems illogical, and it is illogical from our perspective, but when you understand the world from the left's point of view, they literally believe that capitalism created gender as a social construct to oppress half the population. And so one of the big goals that they do have, and this is serious, it sounds crazy, but it's serious, is they do want to abolish gender as we know it. They talk about it all the time, abolishing the gender binary, basically making everyone a non-binary they, them. That is their dream world, and that's the ideology we saw expressed at this conference.
They're going in the wrong direction with this. I mean, I agree from I can see where capitalism, I suppose, creates the roles, like but not, it's not like it's capitalism that's done this. It's actually a function of so for example, World War II. So after World War II is a great example because World War II had a different impact on different countries. Germany had a very different impact after World War II than the United States, right? Germany lost a lot of their men. So at the end of the war, they didn't have a lot of men in Germany. So what happened was women had to rise up and take jobs that men otherwise would have filled previously when there was maybe different gender roles. So it created in Germany now a more egalitarian society where you've had, Angela Merkel, the prime minister of Germany, a woman, right? You have women as in Germany, there's a lot more percentage of women CEOs, women rising to the top of careers. And that was a function of the war and who was left over after the war. The United States had a very different reaction. During World War II, the women stepped up. The women were doing all these male jobs. You got Rosie the Riveter, women playing baseball. But when the men came back, the men were like, hey, we want our jobs back because there was enough men coming back. So then there was that push back into the gender roles for women of get back into the kitchen. We saw the rise of Playboy. It was like your job is to look hot, be skinny, stay in the kitchen, and raise the kids. And of course, all these women started popping all these pills and, the mommy's little helpers. And it created a different society in the United States. Both countries have capitalism. So it wasn't a function of capitalism. It was a function of necessity, how many jobs there are, the economy itself, how healthy an economy is. You see this in Afghanistan after Taliban took over, for example, when prior to the Taliban being in power, there were women in schools, there was, women doing jobs. When the Taliban took over, the Taliban said, we want to keep it the way it is. The problem is that the United States, rather than accepting the Taliban as the actual government of Afghanistan, decided to squash them and basically sanction them and not allow them to have an economy. So they started losing money. Jobs started going by the wayside. And when that happens, the men say, hey, we want the jobs. We're the ones that need to support the family. So women, you need to go somewhere else, do something else. And it pushes the women out of the economic portion of society. And it's economics. It's not a function. If you've got more jobs, suddenly and you don't have enough men, then suddenly you need the women to start filling those jobs and women will have those same opportunities. So it's a function of economy and the health and robustness of an economy, how many jobs there are. That's why I think we're seeing in this society right now a push for women to go back into that trad wife trend. because the economy's not that great. So men are like, hey, where are the jobs? We need jobs. Like this isn't, we're not able to support families. We're not able to have that middle class life that we claim that we, that they claimed we could have. So, it's odd. And throughout history, we've seen this sort of dynamic where, at some point women are more involved. At some point women are not, but to blame it specifically on capitalism, to me just seems really bizarre as, well, no, this is just a function of that. And not being able to see beyond that to me is, this is like in any society. It doesn't matter what the economy, how it runs, or what the economic makeup is. Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense, Kim, but what you got to understand is they have a completely different definition of capitalism than you do. And listen, I'm not going to be an apologist for capitalism. I don't think capitalism is a perfect system. And I agree with pretty much everything you just said. It's a very nuanced discussion of what's going on. However, their definition of capitalism is fundamentally divorced from your definition and my definition and most people's definition. And so what they believe is capitalism is explicitly defined as private property ownership that allows people to accumulate personal individual wealth. And not only is it an economic model, as you just laid out, but to them, capitalism is also a cultural model that includes things like the gender binary and the nuclear family. And so when they're talking about gender, what they're talking about is abolishing gender as a way to get at the nuclear family unit, because they believe the nuclear family unit is the social reproduction mechanism of capitalism. So that capitalism, when people have kids, I swear to God, I have them on video saying this, that when people have kids and they raise them in the nuclear family, they're raising them with capitalist values and thus reproducing capitalism. So these are Marxists, these are socialists, these are revolutionaries. And what they believe is that they cannot overthrow capitalism and install Marxism in the United States until they abolish gender and the nuclear family. And that's why they're attacking it. And if people want more information about that, I host a podcast called the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, where we literally read their documents explaining this. So you don't have to take my word for it. I will show you their documents where they lay all this out.
It just seems so bizarre that they can't divorce the economic model from social constructs. Like they think that why would a nuclear family, which is, by the way, just natural? This is natural. It's like they're trying to discount or discredit natural human desire, natural human behavior, right? And they want to, like, why does Marxism and communism require an abolishment of the nuclear family? I guess I just don't understand that.
Yeah, so first off, it is actually in the Communist Manifesto where they talk about abolishing the family as a key aspect of implementing communism. So it does actually go back to their founding. But what I will say is there are socialist groups in the country that don't buy into this stuff. You look at something like the Revolutionary Communists of America, they actually reject all this stuff and they just are looking at capitalism as an economic model. So not all of them do this, but this is a fundamental element of queer Marxism, which is something that I study very in depth. I'm working on 2 different books about it right now. Queer Marxism is the most dystopian ideology on the left. And what they believe is that marriage is a form of propertied relations, because remember, capitalism is defined as private property ownership. And so if you get married to someone and you're in a monogamous relationship, you're engaging in capitalism through that marriage because you are literally the property of another person. They also believe that parental rights are a form of private property. This is why we always see the left going after parental rights, because they believe that if you have control over what your children can consume or what they can learn in school or things like that, then you are also engaging in a form of propertied relationships where you're treating your kids like slaves, and it is their job to liberate the children from the adult supremacy of their parents. That's their language. That's not mine.
I just don't understand why they think all of that's necessary to implement communism. Like, I just can't, I guess I'm sure they can link it better than I can, and maybe they could explain it so then I'd go, oh, okay, I understand why now you think that. But I just can't wrap my mind around what any of that has to do with an economic model.
Yeah, so it has to go back to the job of the communists is to awaken people to class consciousness, which is to awaken them to the idea that there are different classes and that they are part of the oppressed class and that they will never be part of the bourgeois class or the ownership class. One of the things that they believe indoctrinates people to believe they're part of, or indoctrinates people into capitalism rather, is the idea of the family, is having kids within a nuclear family, raising them with these traditional values. They believe that instills capitalism capitalism in them from the time they're born. And thus, when they grow up and they go into the workforce and they become the new oppressed workers under capitalism, they will continue to perpetuate it through that. So disrupting the nuclear family is really one of their key goals in terms of overthrowing what we currently have in the United States.
Yeah, it's just so bizarre and completely delusional to go against human nature, and like what we're supposed to treat all the kids the same. So even if you have children, you're supposed to feel the same way about your own children as you do other children from other families, because that's crazy. That's not natural.
Yeah.
That's not
They
natural
believe
at all.
that they believe that children should belong to the community. And I actually have them on tape from another event talking about how children should have multiple sets of parents within the community. So essentially, they want everyone to see themselves as a caregiver for everyone else, and that, it takes a village to raise a child. But speaking up from unhinged from reality, you're going to love the next clip. The next clip is one of the most unhinged things I have ever heard at any infiltration ever.
Okay, let's watch.
So I'm going to make the case here that the hierarchical practices separating humans from other humans is sustained by an interlocking system of domination, that is, human supremacy, which separates humans from non-humans and serves the interests of white male supremacism, to which it is inextricably bound. In other words, I consider the possibility that male and white supremacism is so deeply interlinked with and sustained by practices of human supremacy that tackling one, whilst its supremacist others stand, may limit the opportunity to fully dismantle any. Addressing this, and in its transdisciplinary theorizing and particular engagement with ecofeminist and indigenous perspectives, posthuman feminism reveals the workings of human supremacy as underwriting white male supremacism. In this combined man-anthropos framework, both human and non-human beings are constrained by the exclusionary ideas of man as the universal subject that speaks for all humans, and humans as the exceptional species that speaks for all beings. I suggest that much work has advanced our understanding of the damage and exclusion wrought by male and white supremacist systems and thinking, but we are less attuned to the co-occurrence of human supremacism, the function of anthropos in this man-anthropos framework, and how its own exclusionary and hierarchical ideas contribute to these systems and norms, as well as the worldviews of far-right actors. In other words, in this man-anthropos grip on the Western world, we are alive to the exclusionary effects of man, but what of anthropos? Whilst human supremacism or human exceptionalism is not only a post-human feminist concept, post-human feminism places it in a convergence with male supremacism and sort of defines it as the systems and beliefs that support a view of humans as superior to non-human beings, and that nature, constituted by a biophysical world of vital, self-organizing material beings, is entirely separate from culture.
Okay, so explain what this person, do you know who that person was, and what was it that they were saying?
Yeah, that person is a PhD level researcher at Deakin University in Australia. There was actually a huge Australia contingent at this conference for some reason. And so let me break down the language, because I know that might be confusing to people. The argument that they're making is that if human beings see themselves as superior to all non-human beings like nature and animals and things like that on the planet, then we are reinforcing aspects of white supremacy and male supremacism. Because if human beings believe that they are the most advanced species on the planet, that means we believe in a hierarchy, which means that we are also supporting other types of hierarchies in which white people are above other people or men are above other people. And this is called post-human feminism. I had never heard of this before. And so that's the new thing, I guess, is that we can't believe that humans are superior or we're fascists.
Wow, they really went far on this one, right? They start off with okay, male supremacy, and then they go off onto, well, human, if we just break it down from the beginning, if we say humans are not superior, then we can go from there and unravel everything else. That's what they're trying to say.
That's exactly right. And this is going to be connected with the people that you see doing climate change activism or ecofeminism. We see it coming out of that. And so that the person that we were watching is probably like a radical climate change activist that is making the argument that if we don't see ourselves on an even playing field with all other species on the planet and return to our hunter-gatherer roots where we're returning all the land to the indigenous people and, not doing any of the things that humans do, then we are literally fascist, male, and white supremacists.
This is, I can't believe, I can believe that this was funded by the University of California, Berkeley, but at the same time, I can't believe that this is still happening, that they're still pushing further and further extreme thinking. And the left should be going in the other direction. They should be going into the direction of populism. Leftist populism would be, like the Bernie Sanders style populism. And instead they're going into this really bizarre place thinking that this is going to win friends and influence people. I'm not sure is this really, do you think people are really buying into this?
Oh, I absolutely think that people are buying into this. I mean, listen, I spend basically 6 days a week watching the radical left. This is what they believe. This is who they are. And I think for me, there were a couple shocking things. Well, there are many shocking things about this, but a couple things that I want to make sure people understand. First off, I mentioned this earlier, but what was presented at this conference, a lot of these papers are accepted as PhD dissertations. This is accepted as your dissertation requirement for getting your doctorate at major universities all over the United States, all over the world. This is what they're studying in school. And that actually brings me to my next point, which is there are dozens, perhaps hundreds of leftist researchers throughout the country who their entire job is to study the right. Now, their ideas are crazy and their methods are crazy and their conclusions are often wrong. But I do think it's actually very, very telling that there are so many people whose literal job, their academic career, is spent studying and picking apart the right and then reporting back to each other and going to these events and sharing their ideas. A lot of people at this event talked about going undercover at right-wing events in order to study them. And I have to say, as someone who I consider myself to be a person that has spent several years now studying the left and trying to understand them as they understand themselves, there's no one doing this on our side. I don't know of anyone else doing this stuff like I am. If anyone knows, and I'll say out to your audience, if anyone knows of anyone else doing this, please get in touch with me because I would really love to talk to you. But they have an army of people doing this to us and we are not returning it at all. And that should quite frankly terrify everyone.
Well, it would be okay, I think, if they were studying to try to understand and coming to, one of the things, Carlin, I think, do you think that you're just going into the most fringe of the fringe? Because I can see there's a lot of right-wing fringe too. I see a rise in, for example, of genuine white supremacy or white, I don't know if I would call it supremacy. Yeah, I see white supremacy rising actually. And I'm one that's, the left has been claiming this for years and years and years. And I've always been like, okay, yeah, you guys are crazy. I'm not feeling like, when I walk out of the house, racism is not my number one worry, like they try to make me feel like. But I have seen, especially on social media, a rise of white, like what I would call white supremacy, I suppose, where there's people that say, you want to just live in white neighborhoods with white people because white people don't have as many problems. And so I've seen that and I think that if the left were to start infiltrating those groups, then they would just come away with insanity. They would just be like, the right is crazy. They're all a bunch of racist white supremacists. And that would be their worldview of people on the right. And I don't think it's really representative at all of the actual right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and as you know, I have experience with exactly the same groups you do. We talked about it last time I was on your show. And so I understand exactly what you're talking about. And I agree with you that there are absolute fringes on the right that are expressing extremely crazy ideas. What I would say is I am not going into fringe groups on the left. These are groups that are funded by major universities. This is stuff that's taught at major universities. It's taught in K through 12 schools. I've got other infiltrations coming up that are specifically talking about teaching this stuff in schools. And so these ideas are extremely prevalent on the left. Kim, I have 4 years of videos of these groups talking about these ideas. Just last week, I infiltrated a class at Harvard University that was a literal class in activism taught by a professor of activism in which they were expressing some of the same ideas that I was seeing at this conference. That is Harvard University general education requirements. I have video of that on my Substack if people want to see it. And so are these crazy extremist ideas? Yes. But I don't think people understand how common these crazy extremist ideas are on the left and how prevalent they are. So this is what they believe. And this is what Democrats believe. There's a difference between Democrats and liberals and progressives. And then we get into the revolutionary socialists. So I'm not going to say your average moderate Democrat off the street believes this stuff. They don't. Most of them don't even know that this is happening in their own backyard. but there is an extremely radicalized contingent on the left that does believe this. And I'll tell you what, ever since the election, the radicalized contingent is just trying to pick people off that are disaffected from the Democratic Party. They're specifically messaging out to them to get them more radicalized, to teach these ideas. This is part of why we're seeing all the protests pop up. They're trying to radicalize people who are not happy with the Democratic Party, but that are not going to turn right. And so they're giving them a home to go to, saying, we don't like the Democrats either. The people at this conference do not like the Democrats. They don't like them any more than the Republicans. And so I don't think people understand how big this problem is. And if people want to see it, I can show video of it anytime.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you make a really great point that those fringe groups that I'm seeing rise on the right are not being funded by major universities. And, you know, they're gaining audience on YouTube or something, but it's not, there aren't institutions that are out there saying, well, we want to promote this and we want to spread this and we think that this is the right way of thinking. And that is what we are seeing on the left. You're right. I mean, this is a major university, one of the top universities in the country that sponsored this event. And that is frightening. It's not surprising, though. It is University of California, Berkeley. They're known for being super fringe, but still it's a good point that this is what they would prefer the left to become, which is crazy. They're already crazy, but extra crazy, I suppose. Carlin, we do have the links down below to your Substack, also to your Twitter account or X account that people can follow to see more of these clips that you're going to be unveiling in the next few. How long is it going to be? I know you said you had so many and that you're working on all of them.
It is literally going to take weeks for me to release all the clips I have from this conference. So I would just encourage everyone, follow along, share the information, show people what's really being said, because I don't think enough people understand what is being said behind closed doors at these leftist events. And people need to start seeing it. A lot of people are dismissing the left right now. They're saying, oh, they lost, we won, they're demoralized. The left is not demoralized. They're actually pumping the gas on crazy right now. And things are only going to get worse as we get into the summer months.
Carlin Borisenko, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that was fascinating and frightening, I have to say. The left, you just think that they would get their act together, but instead they're just getting more and more fringe, and that is really frightening. This is why I do think, I mark my words, I believe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will be president of the United States. Unless she loses, but I think she will be the candidate for the Democrats. I don't know if it'll be this time around or the next time around, but I do think that she's on the horizon, and she frightens me because she's about a lot of these ideas that were spewed out, like deplatforming people. She's been a giant champion of that, and who knows what else she thinks about. That she believes in indoctrinating the youth. She might not phrase it that way. Maybe she does, but she certainly believes in that. And those types of things are frightening to me. That type of ideology is frightening to me. They think they're fighting fascism, and really they're just ushering it in. They're the ones who think they're fighting for democracy, and meanwhile they end up completely demolishing it on their side, forcing people to vote for their candidate that they selected. I mean, it's just insanity. All right, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining. We'll be back tomorrow night, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Be sure to follow the show and get those notifications. Sign up for the notifications so that you know when the show is live, when we're airing. So do that so that you never miss out. Thank you again. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great one. Bye-bye.